Hi everyone, Natasha Wilkerson here from Vivify STEM, and I'm just so excited to be back with you. So in this session, we will cover strategies on how to increase student voice in your classroom. By making decisions and driving the learning, students will become more motivated and improve critical thinking, problem solving, and overall learning. Let's dive in. In teaching, we all work to serve our students. Everything we do, from the lessons we plan to how we teach, and even how we decorate our classrooms, we do it for the kids. But sometimes, actually probably pretty often, we get lost in the details and lose a sense of purpose. I mean, we're being pulled in a million directions from administrators, parents, testing requirements, other teachers, standards. It gets overwhelming. So let's step back from all that noise for just a minute and consider the purpose of our teaching. So I want you to think about this question. What are your goals for your students? And I don't mean what the textbook or the principal want you to have for your students. What are your goals for your classroom? In the end of the year, what do you want your students to walk away with? Pause the video and really think about this. Maybe jot a list or think of the core of what you teach and the impact you want to have. Now that you may have some ideas in mind for your goals for your students, let me share my list. So my focus is middle school STEM, and here's what I came up with for goals for my students. Let's see if we have any similarities. So first, demonstrate a deep and robust understanding of fundamental science and engineering concepts. Understand how science and engineering are used to solve real-world problems. Use critical thinking skills. Effectively solve problems. Effectively communicate ideas. Demonstrate social and teamwork skills. Convey self-confidence. Convey a positive learning attitude. Be curious and creative. What do you think? How does this compare with your list? I find that teachers often have very similar goals for their students, but how do we actually make progress on things like problem solving or communication? And we all have specific content goals, but how do we promote a deep and robust understanding of some fundamental key concepts? As teachers, we often try to cram a lot of information into a school year, but unfortunately, students likely just memorize and quickly forget most of it. I know I've been guilty of that as a student. So how do we really support their learning? Also, what does any of this have to do with student voice? Well, let's consider a traditional lecture-style classroom. So imagine sitting in the back of a room. A teacher walks in, opens up a PowerPoint, and for the next 45 minutes, you listen to them talk about kinetic and potential energy. Maybe they do a demo or show a video. But as a student, your job is just to listen and take notes. Now let's take our list of goals. As the students sit in the classroom listening, how much progress are we making? Did they improve problem solving, critical thinking? How much do you think they actually learned about kinetic and potential energy? Would they be able to apply this knowledge to a new scenario? And in direct instruction, the teacher is doing 100% of the work. Students are allowed to comfortably sit in the room without feeling any pressure to think. Instead, we need our students to take an active role in our classroom. Their voice is what matters. We need to figure out, what do they already know? What misconceptions do they have? Because it doesn't matter what I know about energy, it matters what my students know, and if they get it, and if they can apply it in meaningful ways. So now I'm in elementary STEMCon, and I know I'm talking with educators involved in STEM, which typically is a very hands-on and project-based approach to learning. So you're probably thinking, I don't just lecture in my classroom. Well, we often talk about hands-on learning. What about minds on? While students may be actively engaged in activities, how do we ensure they're actively thinking, problem solving, being creative, learning science and math? How do we give our students a voice and empower them to learn? So let's turn to an example. I'm going to walk you through a classic STEM challenge, the catapult. First, I'll present you with a version I found online. As I go through it, think about your goals. Will this actively meet your goals for students? Is it not only hands-on, but also minds-on? Switch to your student hat for a moment and step into my classroom. Hello, students. Our class's mission today is to design and build a catapult with the goal of launching a ping pong ball to knock over a tower. To complete this mission, you must follow the design constraints or rules. Your catapult must use a rubber band to power your device, rest on the ground, use an arm and fulcrum, and use the provided materials. Here's a picture of a catapult to show you the different parts. The base of the catapult acts as the fulcrum, or where the lever arm rests. The arm pushes our ping pong ball forward, and the frame sits on the ground and supports the catapult. To build your catapult, each team has been provided with a bag of supplies that include the following: 10 jumbo craft sticks, 6 rubber bands, and a plastic spoon. Now, catapults are tricky, so I'm going to walk you through an example of how to build a catapult. Keep in mind that you can make any modifications to this design, but I don't want you to be too frustrated. Okay, step 1, take 8 of the craft sticks and tie a rubber band tightly around one end. Then step 2, tie another rubber band tightly across the opposite end so all the sticks are tightly put together. Step 3, now take your other 2 sticks and tie a rubber band on one of the ends. And you want to keep it really close to the edge of the sticks. Step 4, insert the sticks banded together through the 2, like this. Step 5, tie a rubber band in cross fashion, joining the 2 pieces, like this. The closer this bundle gets to the edge, the more leverage your catapult will have. And then for step 6, you can attach a plastic spoon right here to launch your ping pong ball. But this is just an example. You can build any catapult design as long as you meet the design constraints. I provided each team a handout that walks you through the design process. First, work together to brainstorm some designs. Then you will decide on a device to build using your materials. Then we test. We will use the data table to record how many trials it takes to knock over the tower. We can also take some distance measurements to see how we can make the catapult more powerful. Make sure to modify and improve your catapult between each trial, because engineering is all about improving your design. Good luck! What did you think of our catapult challenge? Have you done something similar with your students? In this example, I am sure students had an amazing time building and launching ping pong balls or other objects with their catapults. But what were your thoughts as I was walking through the example? If you were a student, do you think you would make many modifications to that design that I showed them? When I first started teaching STEM, I was so careful to prevent pain points for my students. I didn't want them to get so frustrated they would just give up. And catapults are pretty tricky. So teachers often give lots of examples or walk their students step by step through the building process. But let's step back to our goals. How well did this activity promote your goals? Did students use critical thinking, problem solving, creativity if they're just following your example? You likely also wanted to cover kinetic and potential energy. But how much would students understand these principles in using the rubber bands in this challenge? Overall, in this example, the teacher's voice was overpowering. I dictated the challenge, the materials to be used, how the data was being collected. I even gave a very specific example of how to build the device, leaving very little room for my students to be creative or have to do much thinking at all. I was doing all the heavy lifting, and I was actually stifling their learning. So how do we change our approach? Well, join me back in the classroom for Catapults Take 2. Hello class, in today's mission, your challenge is to design and build a device with the goal of launching a ping pong ball to knock over a tower. So design constraints are: use a rubber band to power your device, must rest on the ground, must have an arm and fulcrum. An arm just means something that will hold our ping pong ball and launch it. A fulcrum is the point the arm rotates around. So everybody do this. Hold up your arm and move it like this. Imagine a ping pong ball in your hand. And there's our fulcrum. That's what your device needs. Now, before we begin, let's talk some more about the constraints. Here's a rubber band. What happens if I stretch it and then let it go? Why does it want to return to its original shape? Think back when we discussed kinetic and potential energy. How can we apply those same principles to a rubber band? When do I have maximum kinetic energy? Potential energy. Now think individually about this question. How can we capture this energy to power a device to throw an object? What materials might we use? Here on the table I have some options. Draw your ideas on a sheet of paper. Okay, a quick note here from the teacher perspective. So as students work, I like to walk around and check their designs. Remember that this time the students did not get any examples or any ideas, so as students work individually, I go around and I check out their sketches, ask questions, and just get an idea of where they are and what support they still need. Perhaps I notice that many are doing a slingshot design. I can stop the class and describe this idea that many are doing. I might ask, how does this design meet all the design criteria? What is missing? The goal here is to show that the device must rest on the ground and it requires a fulcrum. Students also need to recognize that the entire structure needs some kind of frame to keep it together. So give them a chance to struggle with the constraints on their own before asking guiding questions and providing hints to help them. You may also want to discuss as a class what materials might be useful for different parts of the device. Okay, back to student mode. All right, class, now that you've worked individually, share your design with a partner. Check, does it meet all the design constraints? How do your designs compare? How might we improve each design? Are there ideas from one design that might improve the other? I'll come around and talk with each of you as you work. Now that you've had a chance to work in partners, I want you to determine one final design that includes a list of materials that you need. Think carefully about how you will use those materials and how much you need. After you have your design, bring it to me for a check prior to gathering building supplies. And remember, our goal is to design a device to knock over a tower of cups. Besides the constraints listed, what else might your device need to be successful? How will you test and improve your device? How might we record data about our catapults? Good luck, everyone. Okay, let's put our teacher hat back on. What did you think of this version of the Catapult Challenge? You probably noticed that I asked a lot of questions, and that's important. Questions are how we can reveal what our students are thinking, what support they need, and to give them ownership of the learning. You may also have noticed that students first worked individually. I think that's important. Many are probably familiar with Think, Pair, Share as an effective teaching strategy where students are first required to think about a question, discuss with partners, and then come back together as a class. I think this works really well in an engineering or STEM classroom, maybe during the brainstorming and design phases. Giving students the space to first think on their own is important for them to be part of the team. Putting students into teams too early might stifle some of their voices as they might be overpowered by the bigger personalities in the team. And I found that smaller teams, even just partners, is a great way to ensure everyone has a voice in the design process. This might not always be feasible, and you can give them each student a role on a larger team. Another adaptation for the catapult challenge is to have each team build 2 catapults and compare the designs through a series of tests. So perhaps each student could build their own catapult, but they work in a team to test each design and compare the results. You may have noticed in the second challenge that I asked, how might we record data about our catapults? Instead of providing students with a data table, consider discussing as a class the best way to accurately collect data to compare designs. Asking questions such as, what data is important to collect? How can we organize our data? How can we compare the catapults? What do you think of this second version? Instead of spoon-feeding each step of the activity to the students, we're now requiring them to be involved. And how might that increase progress towards our goals? Students are required to critically think about the design constraints, what kind of materials to use, and how to collect data. They're also likely to be more motivated as their ideas are driving the activity. So now let's get into the final part of this session by discussing some more tips and tricks to help you bring in student voice. This session is all about increasing student voice in our classroom by implementing activities that are not only hands-on, but minds-on. Comparing the 2 catapult challenge gives one example of how you can increase student engagement and learning through asking questions and allowing students to drive the challenge. But here are a few other things to consider. 1. Ask open-ended questions. Notice that my questions often started with how, what, why. Instead of, does your device meet the constraints? So yes, no. How does your device meet the constraints? Forcing them to really think about it. These questions will draw out their thinking. 2. Wait for them to respond. So just as important as asking good questions is waiting for a response. This might seem obvious, but the average teacher waits less than 1 second after asking a question. I mean, it can be awkward to just stand there waiting for your students to talk. But researchers have found that a pause of 3 seconds or more is critical to give students time to come up with a response and results in improved comprehension and learning. 3. Create a positive learning environment. If we want students to talk, we need to make them feel safe. Waiting for a response is important. But students are often trained in school that the teacher will just give the response or the answer eventually. But don't. After asking a question, walk around the room. Use some nonverbals, such as an encouraging smile as you look around expectantly. When you get a response, try to stay neutral. You might give a simple nod and then wait for another student to respond. Or perhaps you ask a follow-up question using that response. The point here is to show that you're welcoming everyone to talk, all responses. Students shouldn't feel judged or rely on you for approval. 4. Build ups to student inquiry. So the second catapult challenge is likely a little too open-ended for the beginning of the year or for younger students. And it's okay to provide instructions and model skills like how to collect data or how to use materials. If providing specific instructions, you might pause and say, why do you think we did this step? Or why is this important? Just to keep their minds turned on and thinking. And it's definitely okay to give students a bag of supplies for a design challenge, especially when you have a ton of kids or maybe younger students. But really try to stay away from examples of what to do with those materials. That's going to really stifle their creativity as they're just going to try to copy the example, thinking it's the right answer. And 5, allow for differentiation. So final note here, when you have access to your students' thinking, use it. Adapt the activities to meet their needs or follow their lead. For example, perhaps one class decides they want to measure the distance their catapult can throw the ping pong ball, but another class really wants to measure accuracy. Or maybe one class is really struggling with a building and you need to spend more time on how to use the different materials to create a frame. To best serve our students, we need to listen and provide support as we can. Honestly, it's just easier to tell students what to do. And it probably looks a lot more impressive to administrators if we walk away doing 20 different engineering design challenges in our classroom. We can show off roller coasters and rovers and robots. But this likely means we had to rush through the process and maybe had to give a lot of step-by-step instructions to help teams move past those pain points in the design and building. But what if instead we focused on less challenges and gave more time to explore science concepts, try out different materials, conduct multiple rounds of testing driven by the students' ideas, and just give students the space to be fully immersed and involved? Or maybe we even let the students determine which problem they want to solve, and they come up with the design constraints. Which path would result in making more progress towards our goals for students? I hope this session gives you some ideas on how to promote your students' voice in your classroom. What strategies do you use to empower your kids to take an active role? I would love to connect with you via email or social media. Enjoy the rest of the conference.